They told her she was trash. They told her she didn't belong. In front of 50 of the city's elite, her own husband dragged her to the door and threw her into the rain while his mother laughed. Sarah didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She just looked at him and said, "You've made your choice." He thought he was discarding a penniless orphan. He had no idea that the muddy car pulling into the driveway wasn't a taxi. It was a convoy. And the man stepping out. He owns the bank that holds their mortgage. Tonight, the dynasty falls. The dinner party at the Kensington Heights estate was intended to be the social apex of the season. For David Montgomery, it was more than a party. It was a coronation. He had just secured the merger with Rothschild and Company, a deal that would finally cement his family's name among the old money of New York, rather than the new money striving they had been accused of for decades. The dining room was a theatre of excess. A 30-foot mahogany table polished to a mirror shine sat beneath a chandelier that cost more than most people's homes. The guests were a curated list of who's who: Senator Patrick O'Malley, the heiress Vivian St. Clair, and the ruthless real estate mogul Gregory Halloway. And then there was Sarah. Sarah Montgomery sat at the far end of the table near the kitchen swing door. She wore a simple navy blue dress she had bought at a department store 3 years ago. It was elegant, but in a room full of custom Dior and vintage Chanel, she looked like a staff member who had accidentally sat down. Her mother-in-law, Beatrice Montgomery, made sure everyone noticed. "Sarah, dear." Beatrice's voice cut through the low hum of conversation like a serrated knife. She tapped a spoon against her crystal glass. "Could you run to the kitchen and check on the soufflé? The staff is so overwhelmed, and you know how comfortable you are with domestic tasks." The table went silent. Senator O'Malley looked up from his wine, an awkward smile freezing on his face. Sarah gripped her napkin under the table until her knuckles turned white. "The staff has it under control, Beatrice. I'm sure Chef Ramsay doesn't need my help." David, seated at the head of the table, didn't defend her. He didn't even look at her. He was too busy laughing at a joke made by Vivian St. Clair, whose hand was resting entirely too comfortably on his forearm. "Oh, nonsense!" Beatrice insisted, her smile tight and predatory. "We all know you worked as a waitress when David found you. It's a skill, really. Don't be ashamed of your roots." A few guests chuckled nervously. The air in the room grew heavy. Sarah looked at David, pleading silently with her eyes. "Say something. Anything." David finally turned to her. His eyes were cold, glazed over with champagne and ambition. "Just check the soufflé, Sarah. Don't make a scene. Mother is just trying to ensure everything is perfect for the senator." The betrayal hit her harder than the insult. Sarah stood up, her legs trembling. "I am your wife, David, not your maid." Beatrice scoffed loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Wife. You're a charity case, darling. David married you because he was going through a rebellious phase. He wanted to save the poor little orphan girl. But let's be honest, the phase is over. Look at you. You don't fit in. You're a stain on this tablecloth." "That's enough," Sarah said, her voice shaking but gaining volume. "I have supported David for 5 years. I worked 2 jobs while he finished his MBA. I paid for the deposit on our first apartment." David slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "I said, don't make a scene." He stood up, towering over the table. The charm he usually reserved for investors vanished, replaced by a sneering cruelty. "You think paying for a deposit gives you the right to embarrass me in front of Senator O'Malley, in front of my business partners? I'm embarrassing you, Sarah asked, incredulous. Your mother is treating me like a servant. Maybe that's because you act like one, David shouted. The veneer of civility was gone. Look around you, Sarah. Look at Vivian. Look at Beatrice. These are women of substance. You're just plain. You bring nothing to this table. No connections, no money, no lineage. You're dragging me down. Beatrice took a sip of her wine, watching the destruction of her son's marriage with satisfied amusement. I told you, David. Oil and water. You know what? David said, a cruel idea forming in his mind. He looked at Vivian, who smirked at him. He looked at the senator, who was watching with morbid curiosity. David realized this was a test. To be part of this world, he had to show he could be ruthless. He had to cut the dead weight. He walked down the length of the table, grabbed Sarah by her upper arm, and yanked her away from her chair. David, you're hurting me, Sarah cried out. I'm freeing you, David hissed. Get out. What? Get out of my house. Tonight. Now. David, it's pouring rain outside. I don't have a car. I don't have anywhere to go. Take an Uber. Take a bus. I don't care, David sneered, dragging her toward the heavy oak front doors. The guests turned in their seats, watching the spectacle. Not one person stood up. Not one person said a word. They were the elite, and they protected their own. Sarah was nobody. David opened the double doors. The storm outside was raging thunder cracking directly overhead. Please, Sarah whispered, tears finally spilling over. We're married. I'll have the papers sent to whatever gutter you crawl back to, David said. He shoved her, hard. Sarah stumbled, her high heels catching on the stone threshold, and she fell onto the wet pavement of the driveway. The cold rain soaked her instantly. Goodbye, Sarah, David said. He slammed the heavy doors shut. The sound is echoed like a gunshot. Inside, Beatrice raised her glass. To David, she announced, and to new beginnings. To David, the room echoed. Outside in the mud and the dark, Sarah Montgomery lay shivering. She didn't stand up immediately. She just watched the golden light spilling from the windows, hearing the muffled laughter of the people who had just destroyed her life. She reached into her soaked clutch for her phone. Her hands were shaking so badly, she dropped it twice. She didn't call a taxi. She didn't call a friend. She dialed a number she had promised herself she would never use. A number written on the back of an old, faded photograph she kept in her wallet. It rang once. Hello, a deep, gravelly voice answered. It sounded like a voice used to giving orders, not taking calls. It's me, Sarah whispered, her voice breaking. It's Sarah. There was a pause on the other end. A silence so heavy it felt like the storm had stopped. Sarah. The voice softened, losing its edge. Granddaughter. He threw me out. Grandfather. She sobbed. They threw me in the mud. The voice on the other end changed instantly. It became cold, terrifyingly calm. Who did? The Montgomerys. Stay exactly where you are, the man said. I am in the city for the summit. I was coming to see you tomorrow. But it seems my schedule has moved up. Grandfather, please, I just need a ride to a motel. A motel. The man let out a dark, dry chuckle. No, my dear, you are a Sterling, and Sterlings do not sleep in motels, and we certainly do not let mongrels treat us like strays. I'm coming, Sarah, and I'm bringing the wrath of God with me. Inside the mansion, the mood had shifted from awkward tension to raucous celebration. With Sarah gone, The problem was solved. Beatrice had already moved Vivian St. Clair into the seat next to David. "You did the right thing, son," Senator O'Malley said, clapping David on the shoulder. "A man in your position needs a partner who understands the game, not someone you have to explain the rules to." "She was holding you back, David," Vivian purred, pouring him more vintage Bordeaux. "You need someone who can help you build an empire, not someone who just lives in it." David felt a surge of adrenaline. They were right. He felt lighter, unburdened. He raised his glass. To the future. To the future. Just as the crystal glasses clinked, a low rumble began to vibrate the floorboards. It wasn't thunder. It was constant, rhythmic, and growing louder. "Is that a helicopter?" Gregory Halloway asked, frowning and looking toward the window. The rumble grew into a roar. Then lights cut through the darkness outside. Not the soft glow of street lamps, but blinding high-intensity beams. Beatrice stood up, annoyed. What on earth is happening? Ideally, the valet shouldn't be making this much noise. She walked to the window and pulled back the heavy velvet drapes. Her glass slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. "Mother," David asked. "What is it?" "David," she whispered, her face draining of all color. "Come here." David walked to the window. The driveway, which moments ago had been empty, save for Sarah's shivering form, was now filled with vehicles. But they weren't police cars or taxis. They were black armored SUVs. 6 of them. They had surrounded the entrance in a tactical formation, and in the center, a massive custom-built Rolls-Royce Phantom, the kind with bulletproof glass and diplomatic flags on the fender, rolled to a stop. Above them, the source of the noise hovered a sleek black helicopter, with the logo of a golden lion on the side, was circling the estate, its spotlight trained directly on the front door. "Who the hell is that?" David asked, his voice trembling. "Is it the feds?" "No," Senator O'Malley said, joining them at the window. He squinted, and then his eyes went wide with pure, unadulterated fear. "That crest, the golden lion, that's not the government, David. That's Sterling Industries." "Sterling?" David frowned. "You mean Arthur Sterling? The billionaire recluse, the man who practically owns the European energy grid. The man who owns everything," the senator corrected, backing away from the window. "He eats companies like yours for breakfast, David. What is he doing here?" Outside, the scene was unfolding with military precision. Men in black suits with earpieces poured out of the SUVs. They didn't run. They moved with the terrifying coordination of a private security force. 2 of them immediately flanked Sarah, one holding a massive umbrella over her, another wrapping a thick cashmere coat around her shoulders. The back door of the Rolls-Royce opened. A man stepped out. He was in his 80s, but he stood with a posture that defied his age. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than David's car. He leaned on a cane topped with a silver handle in the shape of a lion's head. His hair was white, shocked back, and his face was a map of hard-won battles. This was Arthur Sterling, the man known in the business world as the Iron Duke. He walked straight to Sarah. He didn't hug her immediately. He reached out and touched her face, wiping away a smear of mud with his thumb. He looked at the house, then back at her. He said something the people in the window couldn't hear, and Sarah nodded, weeping. Then Arthur Sterling turned his gaze toward the house. Even through the rain and the distance, David felt the weight of that stare. It was a look of absolute cold-blooded destruction. Arthur gestured to his head of security. "Open it." The security team moved toward the front door. "They're coming in," Beatrice shrieked. "Lock the doors! David, call the police! Call the police!" Senator O'Malley laughed hysterically. "You idiot woman! Arthur Sterling funds the police pension fund. If you call the cops, they'll ask him if he needs help breaking the door down." Boom! The front doors didn't just open. They were thrown wide by the security team. The wind and rain swept into the grand foyer, followed by Arthur Sterling with Sarah clutching his arm. They walked into the dining room. The silence was deafening. 50 of New York's elite stood frozen. David stepped forward, trying to salvage the situation. He fixed his tie, put on his best business smile, and walked toward the old man. "Mr. Sterling," David said, his voice cracking slightly. "What an honor. We weren't expecting." Arthur Sterling didn't stop walking. He didn't even slow down. As David reached out his hand, Arthur's head of security, a man built like a tank, stepped in and shoved David backward with a single hand to the chest. David stumbled and fell into the dessert cart, sending pastries flying. "Don't speak to him," the security guard growled. Arthur stopped at the head of the table. He looked at Beatrice, who was trembling. He looked at the senator, who was staring at the floor. Then he looked at Sarah. "Is this the chair?" Arthur asked, pointing to the seat David had just vacated. "Yes, grandfather," Sarah whispered. "Grandfather?" Beatrice gasped. The word sucked the air out of the room. "No, that's impossible. Sarah is an orphan. She's from nowhere." Arthur Sterling turned slowly to face Beatrice. His eyes were like chips of ice. "She is an orphan," Arthur said, his voice deep and resonating off the walls. "Because my daughter, her mother died running away from the burden of our name. She wanted a simple life. She hid Sarah from me, to protect her from this world." He stepped closer to Beatrice. "I have spent 20 years looking for my granddaughter. My private investigators found her 3 months ago. I respected her wish to live a humble life with the man she loved. I stayed away." Arthur looked down at David, who was wiping cream off his tuxedo jacket. "I thought she was with a man," Arthur spat. "I see now she was with a parasite." "Now see here," David stammered, standing up. "You can't just barge in here. This is private property." Arthur laughed. It was a terrifying sound. "James," Arthur said to the man in the suit beside him, "who holds the mortgage on this estate?" James pulled out a tablet and tapped the screen twice. "Technically, it's with First National City Bank, sir." "And who owns the majority holding in First National City Bank?" "You do, sir. Through the Vanguard Shell Corporation." Arthur smiled. "Call the bank president. Wake him up. Tell him I'm calling in the note on the Montgomery estate. Immediately." "You can't do that," David screamed. "We have 30 days. I can do whatever I want," Arthur said calmly. "I'm Arthur Sterling. I can buy this town and turn it into a parking lot before the sunrise." He turned to the senator. "Patrick, I see you're drinking wine with the man who threw my granddaughter into the mud." "Arthur, I didn't know," the senator stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "I was just a guest. I was leaving." "You're up for re-election next month, aren't you?" Arthur mused. "It would be a shame if the Sterling Super PAC decided to back your opponent. I hear he's polling quite well." "Arthur, please," the senator begged. "I'll leave. I'm leaving right now." "Go," Arthur commanded. "All of you. Anyone who stays is declaring war on the Sterling family." It was a stampede. The elite of New York, the friends of the Montgomerys, grabbed their coats and purses. They didn't say goodbye to David. They didn't look at Beatrice. They ran past the security guards, desperate to escape the blast zone. Within 2 minutes, the room was empty. Only David, Beatrice, Sarah, Arthur, and the security team remained. "Now," Arthur said, pulling out a chair for Sarah and sitting her down at the head of the table, David's seat. "Let's talk about the divorce settlement." "I don't want his money," Sarah said softly. "Oh, I know, my dear," Arthur said, patting her hand. "You don't need his pennies. You're the sole heir to a $40 billion trust." David's knees buckled. He grabbed the back of a chair to stay upright. 40 billion. He had thrown away $40 billion. "We aren't here for his money," Arthur continued, his eyes locking onto David's. "We are here for his dignity. David, you threw my granddaughter out because you thought she was worthless. You wanted to impress your guests. Well, you certainly impressed me." Arthur reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded document. He tossed it onto the table. "That is the merger agreement with Rothschild and Company," Arthur said. David's eyes widened. How do you have that?" "I bought Rothschild and Company." "This morning," Arthur said simply. "I heard they were doing business with you. I wanted to see the paperwork myself." He leaned forward. "The deal is dead, David. And so are you." The dining room, once a cacophony of polite laughter and clinking silverware, was now a tomb. The silence wasn't empty. It was heavy, suffocating, filled with the debris of David Montgomery's life. David stared at the merger document, lying on the mahogany table. The paper was crisp white and innocent-looking, yet it was a death warrant. He reached out a trembling hand to touch it, as if verifying its reality would somehow change the ink on the page. "Don't." Arthur Sterling's voice was low, barely a whisper, but it carried the weight of a gavel strike. "You haven't earned the right to touch my paper." David's hand froze in midair. He looked at Beatrice. His mother, the woman who had orchestrated his entire social ascent, who had taught him that people were assets to be acquired or liabilities to be liquidated, was slumped in her chair. Her face was grey. The wine in her glass trembled, rippling with the shaking of her hand. She looked old. For the first time in his life, David saw her not as a titan of society, but as a frightened old woman in a dress that was suddenly too tight. Sarah sat at the head of the table. She looked small in the massive, high-backed chair that David had commissioned from Italy. But she didn't look weak. Her wet hair was plastered to her cheeks, and her mascara had run slightly, but her eyes were dry now. They were fixed on David with an expression he couldn't recognize. It wasn't hate. It wasn't love. It was pity. And that hurt more than the fear. "Grandfather," Sarah said, her voice raspy, "I want to go. I don't want to be here anymore." "We will leave soon, my dear," Arthur said, not taking his eyes off David. "But first we must ensure the trash is taken out properly. You know I'm a stickler for details." Arthur snapped his fingers. James, the head of security, stepped forward and placed a sleek black laptop on the table. He opened it and swiveled the screen toward David. "What is this?" David asked, his throat dry. "This," Arthur said, "is a live feed of the New York Stock Exchange's after-hours trading monitors. And that," he pointed to a red line plummeting on a graph, "is Montgomery Holdings." David squinted. "That's impossible. The market is closed." "The public market is closed," Arthur corrected him, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "But the private sector, the shadow markets where real power moves, they never sleep. News travels fast, David. Word has already gotten out that the Rothschild merger is dead. And word has also gotten out that you have incurred the displeasure of the Sterling family." You're destroying me," David whispered. "I haven't even started," Arthur said. "I'm just letting gravity take its course. You built your company on leverage, didn't you? Loans against loans. Promises based on future earnings." David felt the blood drain from his face. "How do you know that—" "I own the bank, remember?" Arthur leaned back, tenting his fingers. "I know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans. I know about the creative accounting regarding the construction projects in Brooklyn. I know that if your stock drops below $40 a share, your margin calls trigger." Arthur glanced at the laptop screen. "James, what is it trading at?" $38.50, sir," James replied impassively. David grabbed the edge of the table. No. That triggers the clause. The bank will seize everything." "Yes," Arthur said simply. "They will." Beatrice suddenly lunged forward. Sarah, please." She grabbed Sarah's hand, her long, manicured nails digging into Sarah's skin. "You can't let him do this. We're family. I took you in. I taught you how to dress, how to speak." Sarah looked down at Beatrice's hand. She didn't pull away violently. She just slowly, deliberately peeled Beatrice's fingers off her arm, one by one. "You didn't take me in, Beatrice," Sarah said softly. "You tolerated me. You made me feel small so you could feel big. You told me my mother was a whore. You told me I was genetic garbage. I was just trying to motivate you." Beatrice stammered, tears streaming down her face, ruining her heavy makeup. "It was tough love, David. Tell her how much we cared." David looked at Sarah. He wanted to lie. He wanted to say he loved her. But under the gaze of Arthur Sterling, the lie died in his throat. "I threw you out in the rain," David said hollowly. "Yes," Sarah said. "You did. I thought I was choosing my future." "You were," Arthur interjected. "You just chose the wrong one." Arthur stood up. The movement was fluid, powerful. He buttoned his jacket. "James, have the legal team draft the eviction notice. I want them out of this property by noon tomorrow. They can take their clothes and personal effects. Anything purchased with company funds, cars, jewelry, art stays." "Eviction!" Beatrice shrieked. "This is my home. I've lived here for 30 years. "It's the bank's home now," Arthur said, "and I don't like my tenants to be uncouth." He offered his arm to Sarah. "Come, my dear. The helicopter is waiting. I have a suite prepared for you at the plaza. And tomorrow we're going shopping. Real shopping. None of this department store nonsense." Sarah stood up. She looked at David one last time. He was slumped in his chair, staring at the laptop screen, where the red line continued to fall. He looked like a man who had been hollowed out. "David," she said. He looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. "I left my wedding ring on the nightstand upstairs," she said. "You can sell it. It might buy you a few weeks of rent." She turned and took her grandfather's arm. They walked out of the dining room, past the shattered glass, past the abandoned dinner, and out into the night. David and Beatrice were left alone in the silence of the mansion that was no longer theirs. The only sound was the rhythmic thumping of the helicopter blades as it lifted off, carrying the true wealth away, leaving the counterfeits behind. The sun rose over New York City with a cruel, bright clarity. It was the kind of morning that exposed everything: the grime on the sidewalks, the cracks in the pavement, and the absolute ruin of the Montgomery dynasty. David hadn't slept. He sat on the floor of the foyer, surrounded by boxes. The noon deadline Arthur Sterling had given them wasn't a suggestion. At 7 a.m., a team of auditors from the bank had arrived, accompanied by 2 uniformed police officers, to keep the peace. They were inventorying everything. "Hey!" David shouted, as a man in a grey suit picked up a silver vase. "That's a family heirloom." The auditor checked a clipboard. "Item 402, silver vase, early 20th century, listed as collateral on the 2023 bridge loan. It stays." "Collateral!" Beatrice screamed from the top of the stairs. She was wearing a silk robe, her hair dishevelled, clutching a jewellery box. "I never signed off on that." "David did," the auditor said, not even looking up. Beatrice froze. She slowly turned her head toward her son. Her eyes, usually so sharp and calculating, were wide with betrayal. "David, you leveraged the heirlooms. The silver, your grandmother's pearls." David rubbed his face with his hands. He looked unshaven, haggard. "I had to mother the liquidity crunch last year. I thought the Rothschild deal would cover it. I was going to buy it all back before you noticed." "You fool," Beatrice hissed. She descended the stairs, not with grace, but with the heavy steps of the defeated. "You stupid, arrogant fool. You gambled our legacy on a deal you hadn't even signed." "I did it for us," David yelled, finally snapping. He stood up, kicking a box of books. "I did it to keep you in this house. Do you know how much this place costs to run? The staff, the parties, your charity galas, where you just drink champagne and gossip. I was drowning Mother and Sarah. Sarah was the only one who didn't ask me for money. She was the only one who just wanted me." He stopped, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "She was the only asset I had that was real," he whispered. "And I liquidated her." Outside, a horn honked. David walked to the window. The convoy of black SUVs was gone. In its place was a moving truck. A small, beat-up rental truck that David had managed to secure with the last $200 on his personal credit card before it was frozen. "We have to go," David said. "I'm not going," Beatrice said stubbornly. She sat down on the bottom step of the grand staircase. "I refuse. Let them drag me out." "Mrs. Montgomery," one of the police officers said, stepping forward. He was young, and he looked uncomfortable. "Please don't make us do this. The eviction order is signed by a judge. If you don't leave voluntarily, we have to arrest you for trespassing." "Trespassing," Beatrice laughed, a high, manic sound. "In the house where I raised my son." "It's not your house anymore, ma'am," the officer said gently. David walked over to his mother. He reached out a hand. "Mother, please, don't let them see you like this. Don't give them the satisfaction." Beatrice looked at his hand. For a moment, she looked like she would slap it away. Then her shoulders slumped. The fight went out of her. She took his hand and stood up. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice small. "I found a motel in Queens," David said. "It's clean. It's for a few days, until I can figure something out." "Queens," Beatrice repeated the word as if it were a disease. "I haven't been to Queens since 1985. They walked out the front door together, each carrying a single box of clothes. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still muddy. David looked at the spot where Sarah had fallen the night before. The mud was disturbed there, marked by the footprints of the security team that had come to save her. As they loaded the rental truck, a car slowed down on the street. It was a silver Porsche. The window rolled down. It was Gregory Halloway, the real estate mogul who had been at the dinner last night, the man who had laughed when David made the joke about cutting the dead weight. David straightened up, hoping for a lifeline. Gregory, wait." He ran toward the car. "Gregory, listen, it's all a misunderstanding. Sterling is overreacting. I just need a short-term loan, just to bridge the gap. I have a new business plan. Gregory didn't even take off his sunglasses. He looked at David with mild distaste, like one looks at a roadkill. David, Gregory said. Lose my number. What, Gregory? We've been friends for 10 years. We play golf every Sunday. We played golf because you were useful, Gregory said coldly. You're radioactive now. Arthur Sterling sent a memo to every major firm in the city this morning. Anyone who hires you, anyone who lends to you, anyone who even buys you a coffee, gets blacklisted by Sterling Industries. David stopped running. He stood in the middle of the road. He can't do that. That's illegal. It's power, David, Gregory said, rolling up his window. You wanted to play in the big leagues. This is how the game is played. The Porsche sped off, spraying dirty water onto David's trousers. David walked back to the truck. He climbed into the driver's seat. Beatrice was staring straight ahead, clutching her jewelry box like a life preserver. Who was that? She asked. Nobody, David said. Just nobody. He turned the key. The engine sputtered and whined before catching. It was a pathetic sound compared to the roar of the Sterling helicopter. As they drove away from the estate, passing the wrought iron gates for the last time, David looked in the rearview mirror. He saw the for sale sign already being hammered into the lawn by the bank's contractors. But what haunted him wasn't the loss of the house. It was the memory of Sarah's face in the candlelight, the quiet grace she had maintained while they tore her apart. He realized now that she hadn't been the one who didn't fit in. She was the only one who had been real, and in a world of glass and mirrors, he had shattered the only diamond he had. The silence in the penthouse of the Pierre Hotel was different from the silence in the Montgomery estate. At the Montgomerys, the silence was sharp, filled with the unspoken judgments of Beatrice and the indifference of David. Here, 50 floors above Fifth Avenue, the silence was soft. It was the quiet of thick carpets, soundproofed glass and staff, who moved like ghosts. Sarah sat on the edge of a bed that was larger than her first apartment. She was staring at a cup of tea that had gone cold. It had been 3 days. She hadn't turned on the television. She hadn't looked at her phone. Arthur had bought her a new one, a sleek device that sat on the nightstand, preloaded with only one number, his. There was a gentle knock at the door. "Come in," Sarah said. Her voice sounded foreign to her own ears, stronger yet hollow. Arthur Sterling entered. He wasn't wearing the severe suit from the night of the storm. He wore a cashmere cardigan and slacks, looking less like a titan of industry and more like a grandfather. But the silver-handled cane was still there, tapping rhythmically against the floor. "You haven't touched your breakfast," Arthur noted, looking at the tray of untouched fruit and pastries. "I'm not hungry," Sarah said. She looked up at him. "Grandfather, is it true? What the news is saying?" Arthur sat in the velvet armchair opposite her. "I don't watch the news, Sarah. They rarely get the nuances right." "What are they saying?" "That David is ruined, that his company is being liquidated." Sarah picked at a loose thread on the duvet. "Did we have to go that far?" He was my husband." Arthur's face hardened, the grandfatherly warmth receding for a moment to reveal the Iron Duke. "He ceased to be your husband the moment he opened that door to the rain," Arthur said. "But to answer your question, no, I didn't ruin him. I simply stopped holding him up. David was a man walking on a tightrope made of fraud. All I did was cut the safety net." Arthur reached into his cardigan pocket and pulled out a small velvet pouch. "I have something for you. It isn't a gift exactly. It's restitution." He placed the pouch in her hand. Sarah opened it. Inside was a heavy platinum ring, set with a sapphire the size of a quail's egg. It was old, the setting intricate and Victorian. "This was your grandmother's," Arthur said, his voice softening. "And then it was your mother's. She left it behind when she ran away. She said she didn't want the weight of the sterling name. I kept it in a vault for 25 years, hoping one day she would come back for it. She never did." Sarah ran her thumb over the cold stone. Tears pricked her eyes. Why did she run? "Grandfather, was it you, were you? Were you cruel?" Arthur looked out the window at the sprawling expanse of Central Park. He looked tired. "I was exacting," he admitted. "I wanted her to be strong. I wanted her to lead the company. I pushed her hard. Too hard. I thought I was building a dynasty, but I was just crushing a daughter. When she left, I was angry. For a decade I was angry. Then I was just lonely." He turned back to Sarah, his eyes fierce with a protective light. "I made a mistake with her, Sarah. I let her go into the world without protection because of my pride. And she died because she didn't have the resources to fight a sickness that money could have cured." He leaned forward, placing his hand over hers. "I will not make that mistake with you. You have a heart, Sarah. It makes you kind, but it also makes you vulnerable to sharks like David Montgomery. I am going to teach you how to keep your heart, but wear armor over it." Sarah looked at the ring. It was heavy. It felt permanent. "What do I have to do?" she asked. "Tonight," Arthur said, standing up, "we are going to the Metropolitan Opera. It is the opening of the season. Everyone will be there. The Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, and the people who watched you get thrown into the mud." Sarah shrank back. I can't face them. They'll laugh at me. They'll say I'm just the waitress playing dress-up." Arthur walked to the door and opened it. A team of people flowed in, stylists, tailors, makeup artists. They carried a garment bag that looked like it held a cloud of midnight blue silk. Arthur turned back to her, a small, grim smile on his face. "Let them laugh," Arthur said. "But they won't, because tonight you aren't walking in as Sarah Montgomery, the rejected wife. You are walking in as Sarah Sterling, the chairwoman of the Sterling Foundation." "Chairwoman?" Sarah gasped. "I signed the papers this morning," Arthur said casually. "You now control an endowment of $2 billion. You don't need their approval, Sarah. You own their debts." Queen's was loud. That was the first thing David noticed. In the Kensington Heights estate, the loudest thing at night was the wind in the oaks. Here in the cramped second-floor walk-up off Roosevelt Avenue, the night was a symphony of sirens, shouting neighbors, and the constant rattle of the 7 train overhead. It had been 3 weeks. David sat at a folding card table, their dining table now staring at a stack of rejection letters. Goldman Sachs. "We are not hiring at this time. J.P. Morgan. Your application has been flagged by compliance." Even a mid-tier consulting firm in Jersey City. "Mr. Montgomery, given the current litigation regarding your previous holdings, we cannot extend an offer." He was blacklisted, radioactive. Gregory Halloway hadn't been lying. Arthur Sterling hadn't just sued him. He had erased his future. "This coffee is swill," Beatrice complained from the kitchenette. She was wearing her silk robe, but the hem was stained, and it smelled of stale cigarette smoke. She had taken up smoking again, a habit she had quit in 1990. "It's instant, Mother," David snapped, rubbing his temples. "It's what we can afford." "I saw Vivian St. Clair on Instagram," Beatrice said, scrolling through her phone with a manic intensity. "She's in Saint-Tropez, on a yacht. She didn't even reply to my DM. Stop looking at them, David said. They aren't our friends. They were until you ruined it. Beatrice slammed the phone down. If you had just managed the books better, if you hadn't married that girl. David stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the cheap linoleum. That girl is the only reason we aren't in jail. Mother, David shouted, Arthur Sterling could have pressed criminal fraud charges. He didn't. He just took the money and left us to rot. That was mercy. Mercy. Beatrice scoffed. Look at this place, David. There are cockroaches in the bathroom. This is hell. David walked to the window. He looked down at the street. A group of teenagers was fighting over a bicycle. It was a long way from the manicured lawns of his past. He felt a vibration in his pocket. It was a notification on his phone, a news alert. The return of the House of Sterling billionaire Arthur Sterling to attend Met Opera Gala with newly revealed heiress. David's breath hitched. He clicked the link. There was a photo. It was taken earlier that day outside the plaza. Sarah was stepping into a limousine. She was wearing sunglasses and a trench coat, but even in the grainy paparazzi shot, she looked different. She held her head high. She looked untouchable. A twisted idea began to form in David's mind. A delusion born of desperation. She's going to the opera, David whispered. What? Beatrice asked, lighting another cigarette. Sarah. She's going to the Met Gala tonight. David turned to his mother, his eyes feverish. I have to go there. Don't be an idiot. Beatrice blew smoke into the air. You can't get in. Tickets are $30,000. We have $30. I don't need a ticket, David said, pacing the small room. I just need to see her. If I can just talk to her. Without Arthur, without the bodyguards. If I can just look her in the eye. And say what? Beatrice sneered. I'm sorry I threw you in the mud. Please give me $1 million. No, David said, stopping. He believed his own lie now. I need to tell her I love her. She loved me, Mother. For 5 years she loved me when I was nobody. If she sees me, if she sees how much I'm suffering, she'll break. She has a soft heart. You said it yourself. She's weak. She was weak, Beatrice corrected. But go ahead. Go humiliate yourself. I'll be here killing cockroaches. David went to the closet. He pulled out his tuxedo. It was the one thing he had refused to pawn. It smelled slightly of mothballs, and the shirt was wrinkled, but it was a Tom Ford. It was his armor. He dressed in the bathroom, shaving with a dull razor cutting his chin. He dabbed a piece of toilet paper on the cut. He looked in the mirror. He looked handsome, still. But his eyes were desperate. He looked like a man wearing a costume of his former self. He took the subway into Manhattan. He didn't have money for an Uber. He stood in the crowded train car, his tuxedo drawing stares from tired commuters. He held the grab rail, closing his eyes, imagining the reunion. She would see him. She would stop the car. She would cry. She would take him back. He got off at Lincoln Center. The scene was chaos. Barricades were set up for blocks. Flashes of light from hundreds of cameras turned the night into a strobing seizure. Fans and onlookers pressed against the steel railings, screaming the names of celebrities. David pushed through the crowd. Excuse me, VIP coming through, he muttered, trying to affect his old arrogance. Back of the line, buddy, a rough voice said. A tourist shoved him back. David stumbled, but regained his footing. He made his way to the front of the barricade, right near the red carpet entrance. The security was tight, massive men, with earpieces checking lists. He couldn't get in. He knew that. But he could see the drop-off point. Limousines began to arrive. Lady Gaga, the mayor, Senator O'Malley. David shrank back when he saw the senator terrified of being recognized. And then a silence swept over the photographers. A hushed reverence. The Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up. The one with the golden lion crest on the fender. The door opened. Arthur Sterling stepped out first, looking regal in white tie. He turned and offered his hand. Sarah emerged. The crowd gasped. She was wearing a gown of deep midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the light. It was off the shoulder, revealing the creamy skin of her neck, and around her throat sat a necklace of diamonds, so brilliant they looked like captured stars. But it wasn't the jewelry. It was her face. The shy, apologetic girl who used to hide in the kitchen was gone. Her hair was swept up in an intricate chignon. Her makeup was sharp, accentuating her cheekbones. She didn't look down at her feet. She looked straight ahead at the cameras with a cool, serene confidence. "Sarah!" David screamed. His voice was lost in the roar of the crowd. "Sarah!" He lunged against the barricade. "Sarah, it's David!" He waved his arms frantically. The people around him looked at him like he was crazy. "Sarah, please!" Whether it was the sound of his voice or just fate. Sarah paused. She was 10 feet away. She stopped on the red carpet. Arthur stopped with her. He looked toward the barricade, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on David. Arthur didn't scowl. He didn't look angry. He looked at David with mild amusement, as if observing a monkey in a zoo. Then Sarah turned. Her eyes locked onto David's. David's heart hammered against his ribs. This was it. The connection. He smiled a desperate, pleading smile. He mouthed the words, "I love you." Sarah looked at him. She looked at the cheap, wrinkled shirt under his tuxedo. She looked at the cut on his chin. She looked into his desperate, greedy eyes. And then her expression didn't change. Not a flicker of anger. Not a shadow of sadness. It was a look of absolute, total non-recognition. It was the look one gives to a stranger on the street. Polite indifference. She turned her head away, dismissed him entirely, and took her grandfather's arm. "Shall we, grandfather?" she said, her voice clear and steady. "We shall, my dear," Arthur said. They walked up the stairs and into the opera house, leaving David clinging to the cold steel of the barricade. A security guard walked over to David. "Sir, you need to step back. You're disturbing the guests." David slumped against the rail. He realized then that hate would have been better. Hate meant he still mattered. Hate meant there was passion. Indifference was the end. He was no longer her husband. He was no longer her enemy. He was just a face in the crowd, soaking wet in the invisible rain of his own making. 6 months later, winter had returned to New York. David Montgomery stood in the parking lot of a mid-range steakhouse in New Jersey. He pulled his collar up against the biting wind. He wasn't dining there. He was the valet. His hands, once manicured and soft, were chapped and red. He had secured the job under a fake name, David Smith, because the name Montgomery still carried the stench of failure in the city. Beatrice was gone, moved to Florida, to live with a distant cousin who tolerated her only for her meager Social Security check. A sleek black sedan pulled up. David hurried to open the door, hoping for a decent tip. The driver stepped out, leaving the engine running. On the dashboard, a small television screen was broadcasting the evening news. David froze. The chyron on the screen read, "Sterling Foundation purchases historic Montgomery estate." He leaned in, ignoring the customer who was snapping his fingers for a ticket. On the screen, Sarah stood in front of the massive oak doors of his former home, the same doors he had shoved her through. But the house looked different. The cold, imposing gates were open. The windows were warm and bright. A reporter thrust a microphone in her face. "Ms. Sterling, you paid $20 million above the asking price for this property. Rumors say you plan to demolish it. Is that true?" Sarah smiled. It wasn't the shy smile of the wife he knew, nor the cold look of the woman at the opera. It was the smile of a woman who had healed. "No," Sarah said, her voice clear. "I'm not tearing it down. This house was built to keep people out. It was a fortress of exclusion. I'm turning it into the Sterling Sanctuary, a transitional home for women and children who have nowhere else to go. No one will ever be thrown out into the cold from this doorstep again." The camera panned out. Arthur Sterling stood in the background, leaning on his cane, looking at his granddaughter with immense pride. "And what about the previous owners?" the reporter asked. "The Montgomerys?" Sarah paused. For a split second, she looked directly into the camera lens, and David felt like she was looking right through the screen, straight into his soul. "I don't know who they are," Sarah said softly. "The only thing that matters is the future." The screen cut back to the studio anchors. "Hey, buddy, are you deaf?" The customer slammed his car door, startling David. "I said, park the car." David snapped back to his reality. The cold wind, the asphalt, the smell of exhaust. "Yes, sir," David whispered, taking the keys. "Right away, sir." He climbed into the stranger's car. As he adjusted the rearview mirror, he caught a glimpse of himself. He looked older. He looked tired. But mostly he looked invisible. He drove the car to the back of the lot, parked it in the shadows, and turned off the engine. He sat there for a long time in the dark while 50 miles away, the lights of his former home turned on one by one, welcoming strangers in from the cold. This story isn't just about a broken marriage or a lost fortune. It is a reminder that true value isn't found in bank accounts, mergers, or the approval of society's elite. David Montgomery had a diamond in his hands, but because he was blinded by the glitter of fake gold, he threw it away. He learned the hardest lesson of all. Arrogance is a loan you take out against your future, and eventually life calls in the debt. Sarah's journey from the mud to the penthouse wasn't just about her grandfather's money. It was about her reclaiming her dignity. She proved that you can be thrown out, beaten down, and humiliated, but if you know your worth, you will always find your way back to the throne. The tables always turn. Sometimes it just takes a thunderstorm to clear the air. What a ride. I want to know what you think. If you were Sarah, would you have helped David when he was at the bottom? Or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and karma, please destroy that. Like button and hit subscribe so you don't miss our next story. We upload new dramas every week. Thanks for watching, and remember, be careful who you step on. Today, they might be the ones signing your paycheck tomorrow.